Good morning, everyone. This is Ayaka from the Idaho State Department of Education. Thank you, everyone, to be here today. I was trying to figure out how to do post the presentation mode here, and I couldn't figure this out. So I think we're just going to go with this PowerPoint, not the PowerPoint PDF. And you can still see my slides as we scroll down. We posted the slides under handouts if you wanted to pull that out, and if you wanted to read it along, you can certainly do so. And if you have any technical assistance, please send us a chat. Taylor is monitoring, and we'll do our best to help. The presentation is recorded and will be posted on our website along with a transcript of the presentation. If you have any questions, please type into the question box that we have on our screen, and let's get started. So my name is Ayaka, and I am the coordinator of cohort graduation rate activities. I have been working on the cohort graduation rate and reviewing your documents and appeals for the last 5 years at least. And so many of you probably have talked to me in the past. It is great to have you all here today, as I don't think I have ever hosted a presentation like this in the past, so you have not missed anything. And I'm excited to introduce 5 experts today. Here we have today. I have Taylor from the Assessment and Accountability Department. She'll be monitoring the chat and questions box. She's an expert for this platform, WebEx platform, and she's a huge help last year reviewing documents and appeals. Do you want to say anything, Taylor?
Just hello. If you need any help with the webinar today, let me know, and I will do my best to help you guys out.
Thank you, Taylor. And we have Michelle from School Choice. She has been working with me since the beginning to perfect this process. If you have any questions or concerns about homeschool students or virtual school students, please contact Michelle. Do you wanted to say anything, Michelle?
I just wanted to say hello to everybody and thanks for being on this, and hopefully this will help make your appeals process go through smoothly.
Thank you, Michelle. And we have Randy in special education, and she's relatively new, but Randy and I have been working on AccuPlacer quite a bit this year, and she's the transition coordinator. So if you have any questions about special education students and graduation requirements, please contact Randy. Randy, do you want to say anything?
Hey, good, thank you. Yeah, just wanted to say hi to everyone. And yeah, if you have any questions on the special ed side of this, just type in your questions and hopefully I can answer those for you.
Thank you, Randy. And the last but not the least, I have Amy and Roger from the IC team. Both have helped me track down students and review in-state transfer appeals in the past. If you have any questions about IC submissions or duplicate EDU IDs, please contact Amy and Roger. Amy and Roger?
Good morning.
Good morning.
Thank you, Amy and Roger. Now I have going to, let's see, ask you what your main role is, since we can't see you and we don't know who you are. And I've created a poll. If you don't mind selecting what your role is, so we know who you are, that would be great. I'm gonna share who we are so you can see. It looks like we have a lot of secretary and registrars today here on the webinar. Thank you for joining us. And we have principals and admins, as well as IT and IC personnel. Okay, so let's get started. I have a total of 85 slides today. I ended up creating more slides than that I wanted to make. So I hope I can get through until the end, but we are going to talk about the definition of cohort graduation rate, how to adjust the grad status, and lastly, updates and reminders. Before I start, do you have any questions about the presentation?
I'm not seeing any questions, Ayaka.
Okay, great, Taylor. I'm going to move over to the next slide, and we are going to talk about what is cohort graduation rate. So the long definition of cohort graduation rate is posted on the screen. It is the number of students who graduate in 4 or 5 years with a regular high school diploma divided by the number of students who form the adjusted cohort for the graduating class. And specifically, from the beginning of the 9th grade, students who are entering that grade for the first time form a cohort that is subsequently adjusted by adding any students who transfer into the cohort later during that 9th grade year in the next 3 years, and subtracting any students who transfer out, immigrated to another country, or die during that same period. So this definition is directly from the federal government's document. But so what exactly does this mean to us is what we're going to talk about today. And I created a short definition. It's easier to understand. And it is really graduates divided by cohort members. And in the next sections, we're going to talk about what graduates mean to us. And we also talk about what cohort members mean to us in Idaho. So let's talk about graduates. I think this should be easy, right? Who are my graduates? So graduates are cohort members who received a diploma that fully aligns with the state content standards by the end of their 4th or 5th year in high school. And I talk about 4th and 5th year here because we calculate 4-year graduation rate as well as 5-year graduation rate. And graduates include those who with the latest IC exit code of 4A, 4G, 4H, or 4I. As you've noticed, we include early graduates, and also we include summer graduates in the definition of graduates. And so people ask me, why is 4C not part of this list? And to clarify the difference between 4A and 4C exit code, 4A is given to those students who completed all necessarily high school credit or content graduation requirements with or without accommodations. Those with 4A are no longer entitled to free and appropriate public education FAPE. On the other hand, 4C exit code is given to those students completed, adapted, or modified or differentiated course requirements outlined in an IEP. These 4C students are entitled to FAPE until the semester in which the student turns 21. And I wanted to talk about frequent coding mistakes that we see here as we process graduation rate appeals and documentation. We notice that sometimes everyone is coded as 4A, and maybe the system is doing so, but it is challenging if someone is coded 4A, but he or she is not really a graduate, and then coming back in the following school year, we would still consider those kids as non-graduates. And also, enrolling everyone over as 1A, even though those who graduated, you wanted to make sure that they are coded as 4A if they actually graduated, not with 1A. And also coding all students with an IEP as 4C. IEP doesn't necessarily mean that the child receives 4C as an exit code. So you wanted to make sure that a child is actually fully meeting the requirements that's outlined in IDEPA, and also with your, not the department, district. And also not coding early graduates, we see this very often, that early graduates are typically coded as 1A as they exit, but they should be really coded as 4G through 4I if they graduate early. And Advanced Opportunity Department may see this as an evidence for early graduates. So you want to make sure that these are coded correctly. And as we talked about this earlier, the most frequently received question is, why do our life skills students count against our graduation rate? And I've received this question over and over since the beginning of the cohort graduation rate, and we wanted to clarify this today so you have an answer. So the federal guidance states a state may remove students with the most significant cognitive disabilities who are eligible for a state-defined alternate diploma from the student's original cohort if the students do not graduate in 4 years when their original cohort completes grade 12, provided the student remains in school working toward the state-defined alternate diploma. So So as you know, in the state of Idaho, we don't have alternate diploma document or certificate of completion, attendance, and those should be used for special education students unless the same type of documentation is used for all students. A transcript must not explicitly identify the student as special ed or disabled. And if you wanted to know more information about this, you can review the special education manual. The link is available there. And because we don't have alternate diploma, the special education department felt that this guidance from the feds does not necessarily or really apply to our state. But Randy's here today, so if you have any questions about this, you can type in to the question box. So to cover some important points about graduates, graduation status is determined by the latest exit reason, 4A, 4G, 4H, or 4I, submitted via IC for the 2021 school year or prior, including the subsequent summer. You must resubmit your IC file to correct the graduation status because appeals application does not update what's in our system. So if anyone is coded with the wrong code, and if you don't update it, the kids will be forever listed as different exit code, even though he may have already, or he or she may have already graduated. Any questions about graduates?
We have a few questions, Ayaka.
Okay.
So there is no way to appeal our students in our 18 to 21 program?
That's correct. Unfortunately, we would need to deny all those appeals if they come in, since the federal guidance states, well, that our special education department determined that that federal guidance doesn't apply to our state. So 4C kids, unfortunately, are coded as non-graduates. It's just a measure. So it's up to you guys to totally, I mean, you could totally include that in your count as you report your numbers to your folks and say we had this many kids that met the 4C requirements, but for the cohort graduation rate calculation purposes, for accountability, we cannot include 4C students.
Thank you. I am pretty sure you answered this already, but just to cover our bases. So should life skills students not be included on this report?
What do you mean by this report? Would you mind clarifying that? So everyone will be included in the cohort, but if anyone is coded with 4C, they would not be included in the numerator. If
they're excuse me, if they're asking if they need to report them in IC, they would still need to report them, which is going to include them in the report.
Thank you, Amy.
Okay, next question. What timeline do you have for a summer graduate?
Summer graduates, if we look at the summer IC file, so if anyone is coded as graduates in that summer IC file, then we'll consider those kids as graduates.
Thank you. Next question. So the 18 to 21 students are counted as dropouts from a decision of our special ed department and not a federal definition?
They are not dropouts. We don't consider them as a dropout. They are non-graduates.
Okay, and that is the last question we have for now. Thank you.
Okay.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
If someone graduates in the summer, but that particular district does not do a summer upload because they don't have an alternative summer school, can they go back and correct their June upload to report that that person has graduated?
That's a great question, Amy. Yeah, that's what we've been telling folks that's what folks should do, to go back and correct the code, even though the child may have graduated during the summer.
The condition was that they had to have graduated prior to the fall semester starting.
Exactly. Thank you, Amy.
That's
Yep.
what I was remembering.
And Ayaka, there was a follow-up question to that 18 to 21
Okay.
question. Does a non-dropout not count against the district's graduation rate, or does it still count against the district?
So non-graduates count against district graduation rate, sorry, this district graduation rate. So the numerator is graduates, and non-graduates will remain in the denominator. So ultimately, in your word, they will count against your graduation rate. That's correct.
Okay, and that's all we have for now. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. So we kind of talked about cohort members. This is the denominator part of cohort graduation rate, but let's talk about cohort members here. So we have three important factors to consider when we are thinking about who are our cohort members. One is cohort assignment, two is school assignment, and lastly, we have grad status assignment. And we're going to talk about each of these in the next sections. So the first one is cohort assignment. When you are thinking about cohort assignment, you wanted to ask these kind of questions to yourself. When did anyone report grade 9 through 12 for the student to the state via IC for the first time? For Idaho student, and if anyone transfers in from out of state, you wanted to ask, when did the student start grade 9 for the first time? And you can see this in their transcript. And I want to focus on cohort in-state students here. So the cohort class of 2021 for four-year graduation rate, if a child or student had one or more IC enrollment records of these combinations, they will be included in the cohort class of 2021. School year 2021, grade 12, 2019-20, grade 11, school year 18-19, grade 10, and 17-18, grade 9. If anyone had any of these combinations of school year and grade levels, they will be included in the cohort class of 2021. So let's look at the cohort class of 2020 for 5-year. And as you can see, it's the same concept, but the year kind of shifted. So if anyone had any of these combinations of school years and grade levels, they will be included in the cohort class of 2020. So we have school year 19-20, grade 12, school year 18-19, grade 11, school year 17-18, grade 10, school year 16-17, and grade 9. If any of your students had any of these combinations reported through IC, not necessarily from your LEA, or it could be someone else, then the child is assigned to the cohort class of 2020. And so this kind of gets confusing, and then I get this question a lot. What is the difference between cohort versus graduating class? And so I have some examples here. The student on the left is cohort class of 2020, but graduating class of 2021. So this kiddo started grade 9 in 16-17 school year, hit grade 12 by 19-20 school year, but he or she needed to repeat grade 12 the second time in the school year 2021. So cohort class for this child is 2020, but because he or she did not graduate at the end of 2020, then this student is considered graduating class of 2021. So you see the difference of cohort class and graduating class. And for many students, cohort class and graduating class are the same. But on the students on the right, you can see that cohort class of 2021, but because she graduated early, her graduating class was 2020. So you see the difference between cohort class and graduating class. And frequent coding mistakes that we see as we go through appeals process is, and this is not as common anymore because of the validation that's been placed in an SRM, but coding advanced 8th grader as a 9th grader, that the clock starts as soon as you submit grade 9 for that student. And also rolling every 8th grader to the next grade level for the next school year may accidentally assign a child to grade 9, even though that this child may be repeating grade 8 for the second time. And also assigning unrealistic grade level, we've seen, like, for example, a 19-year-old with 3 credits. Should you put the student in grade 12, or is high school even a good choice for this student? And frequently asked question, should I determine grade level by credit and course progression or by age and natural grade progression? Okay, so. And this is currently up to LEAs to determine grade level, and kind of wanted to know and hear from you guys, how are you or would you determining grade level in your district? And I created polls, let me see. Would you mind selecting if you are determining how you are determining grade level in your LEA? I'll wait a little bit. I'm gonna share the results with you guys so you can see how other folks are determining grade level in their LEA or school. And it looks like most people, well, I guess 33% of people determine age and natural grade progression. 15% said it depends, and 33% said I don't get to determine grade level. Okay, so looking at credit course progression and age natural grade progression, looks like more folks determine grade levels based on age and natural grade progression. Thank you so much for that information. It's really helpful. Okay, and so as I mentioned earlier, it is more aligned to the definition to determine grade level by age and natural grade progression for cohort graduation rate purposes, but there is no federal or state requirement regarding how to code a student to a certain grade level. But it was great to see you guys showing us how you guys are coding grade levels, so thank you. The next question is, can we assign a super senior to the previous year's cohort who moved to Idaho for the first time after completing 4 years of high school in another state? Oh, this is another poll. So imagine you receive a student who is considered a super senior, quote unquote, to your school, and he or she moved to Idaho for the first time. How would you code this student? I have a poll here. Grade 12, like any other first-time seniors, grade 12 is a repeat indicator or cohort class. Do you have grades 13, 14, 15 in your school? Or do you have other indicators, or I don't get to code grade level? So it looks like some of you guys have some sort of indicator in your system, or you can identify and enter the cohort class. But I'm surprised to see that no one is using grades 13, 14, 15. I have 5% that said other. I'd like to hear what you meant by other. If you don't mind, put it into the chat box so that we can see. So the answer from us is, unfortunately, at this time, we cannot assign students to previous year's cohort. And especially when we finish calculating graduation rate, that's just solid, finalized. There's nothing that we can do to adjust it. But you can submit a copy of the transcript to us during the appeals window to indicate the student was included in another state's graduation rate calculation. And so we can take them out of the denominator. If anyone comes in to your school after completing 4 years of high school in another state, we can certainly accept appeals. And important points regarding cohort assignment is determined by grade level submitted via IC in the corresponding school year. You saw the combination of school year and grade levels earlier, and you must resubmit your or have previous LEA resubmit their IC file to change the cohort assignment. Before we move on to the next section, do you have any questions about cohort assignment?
Yes, we do. It looks like there was one that was for the previous section, a little follow-up. How far back can we correct an IC report for summer graduate?
Amy and Roger?
You can go back as far as you want. It's the farther back you go, sometimes the more challenging it is, because there could be errors and warnings pop up that you would have to address that were not there at the time, because they were not. We didn't have those rules at the time. So the farther back you go, it might take you a little longer to clear up, because you would still have to make it error free. But you're just talking 3 years pretty much, a maximum of 3 years, I would think, and that's doable.
Thank you. Next question. if a kid skips a grade in elementary or junior high, are they still considered an early graduate based on age?
That's actually come up with advanced opportunities, and they have been determined as an early graduate. If for instance, they skipped grade 2, and that was in respect to advanced opportunity offerings, they were considered an early graduate because but when, for this cohort assignment, the only periods of time that's going to matter is between 9 and 12. Right, Ayaka?
Yes, thank you, Roger.
So technically, you could be an early graduate for advanced opportunities. I don't know that this would happen, but you could be an advanced opportunities early graduate and still be a non-graduate with your cohort if it took you 5 years to graduate, 5 years of high school to graduate. That would not be as typical, but the early graduate is based on 12 years of education, and the cohort is based on 4 years of high school.
Thank you.
Does that make sense? I didn't say that very well, I don't think.
Okay, next question. If we have students who need to make up freshman credits and will redo those classes, do we need to change the cohort or the graduation?
So the cohort is not something that you can change. I mean, if they start grade 9, then that cohort is set. If they needed to repeat grade 9, it doesn't matter because we take the initial submission of grade 9 and the combination of cohort, and not the cohort school year. Does that make sense? Hopefully, I can go back to the slide of combination of this one. So say if someone started grade 9 in this school year and then repeated grade 9 this school year, it doesn't matter because you have this combination of school year and grade 9 already set, and this will determine that cohort year. So even though this child may do grade 9 this year, grade 10 and grade 11 and grade 12, it won't reset because you have this 17-18 school year grade 9 already submitted via IC.
Thank you, and that looks like the last question for now.
Okay, great. Thank you, Taylor. So let's go back to here, school assignment. So remember, when thinking about cohort graduation rate and cohort members, there are 3 important factors: cohort assignment, school assignment, and grad status assignment. And this is the second part of the 3 important factors, school assignment. You wanted to ask this question when you're thinking about school assignment: which Idaho public school had the student last during the 4 or 5 year cohort window? And when we say Idaho public school, this excludes IDLA, detention centers, technical schools, summer schools, and Juniper Hills and Robert Jans, because we don't receive any IC files from them right now. So which Idaho public school had the student last? Student is assigned to the IC base school with the latest exit date or the latest entry date in case of a missing exit date during the 4 or 5 year cohort window. It does not matter if or where the student enrolls in the subsequent school year upon completion of the cohort window. So for example, it doesn't really matter where the child enrolls in the school year 2021-22 for the cohort class of 2021.
Ayaka, can I say something about these last 2 slides? The slide before this, when you said that these are excluded, if these institutions have a later exit date than yours, that doesn't matter. It's still going to fall back to you because we are not, I just wanted to clarify this a little bit in case they didn't understand. If they go to a detention center and they exit the detention center after your district, it's still going to fall back to you because you were the last regular school district or LEA that had the student enrolled.
Thank you, Amy. And so as the IDLA, since they are technically the curriculum provider, and we could exclude kids that went to Juniper Hills and Robert Jans, but when we're talking about school assignment, we we won't be able to exclude those kids that transfer, automatically exclude. Yeah, that's the word. We cannot automatically exclude those kids who transfer to Juniper Hills and Robert Jans because we don't receive IC files from them. In summer schools, again, they would roll back to you, any graduates.
So Ika, if they go to a summer school with another district and they graduate from that district, or they graduate, they have enough credits to graduate at the end of summer school, does that count in the original school districts?
Yeah, it will count as
Okay.
original schools graduates. It all rolls back to that last school. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, this is kind of confusing, and I hope you guys are with me. I can't see you guys, so ask questions if you are not clear what I'm talking about here. And I get comments, I want to say comments. Why am I in this tag game with other schools? And I get this really often. And remember, you may be the last adult the student can count on, and please do your part and play it fair for the student and other schools. I don't wanted to share right now what is unfair behavior here, but please do your part and play it fair for the student and the other schools. And frequent coding mistakes for school assignment. We see a lot of kids receiving a duplicated EDUIDs, and also reporting, well, so if anyone reports duplicated EDUIDs, that will basically reset his or her cohort. So the sending school looks like the child went nowhere because the receiving school did not pick up the child with the same EDUID, and the receiving school will basically start over the cohort for that child because we don't have the historical information of where he or she has been in the past. So please make sure that you're not creating duplicated EDUIDs for your kids. And we see that the folks are reporting enrollment and attendance for no-shows. We clarify this in the business rules guide, but if anyone reports enrollment and 1 day of attendance for any of your kids, then that child is yours. You take that responsibility for that student because he or she was there last at your school. So if anyone did not show up in your school, even though they said they were going to, then you don't want to report these kids through IC. And maybe Amy and Roger, do you want to clarify this part?
Well, it's definitely a big issue, and we want, when it comes time to do your IC report, you want to submit it in time so that you can check your aggregated attendance detail report and look for those students that may have a row of zero attendance. Reporting a zero attendance is reporting attendance, and so that's enrollment. So that's the part that she's talking about there. It's very critical that you figure out those no-shows and get them off your report if they didn't show up at all.
Yeah, because we do have, you may have an attendance policy where you're going to wait 10 days or 15 days or whatever before you realize, or before you classify someone as a no-show, but our report's not due until October. So that's still plenty of time then to go back and however your system requires you to exit those students so that they don't report to us. We don't want to see a no-show on the demographic report at all. And I wanted to also emphasize the not creating a duplicate EDUID, because I had one district that reported a student twice. The same student graduated twice because they left their district at one point and then they came back with a different EDUID. And so they were actually on their cohort twice. And another issue is correcting your the mismatches. If you have if you ignore the warnings for a wrong name. I also had a district that had someone that showed up on their cohort and they said, we have no idea who this student is. Well, they had that student for 4 years, but they ignored the warning that that they were using the wrong name. So the name that's associated with the EDUID is not the name that they were using in their system. So that's why they didn't recognize who that student was. So it is important to make sure that your EDUIDs are correct.
Thank you, Amy and Roger. That was really helpful. And lastly, identifying virtual and part-time public school student as homeschool student. We saw that quite often, especially for those kids that are finishing up the last semester and only taking 1 or 2 courses. You don't want to code those kids as homeschool or private student if they are graduating from your school, even though they may be part-time. You wanted to add anything, Roger, Amy, Michelle?
I think you got it.
Yeah,
Okay.
I think this could be done mistakenly both ways. If you code someone as part-time and they're not, I mean, if you code someone as homeschool and like you said, they just are needing a course or 2, then they will not count for you as a graduate. And you wouldn't want to code someone as a homeschool student when they really, or the opposite way. So yeah, just pay attention to that homeschool indicator for both directions.
Michelle may have something to say, but I do want to jump in there and say we've seen a little bit of an issue, particularly with COVID, where thinking that a online school is a homeschool student, but if the online school is of the district, then they are not a homeschool student. I don't know if you want to clarify that, Ayaka, but
Yeah,
I'll go ahead and step in and add if that's okay, Aika.
go ahead, Michelle.
The thing is with homeschool students, they are not receiving instruction from a school that is receiving any kind of public funding. So if it's a virtual school, they're schooling at home versus homeschooling. The biggest difference is that if they're attending a public school of any kind, they're meeting those state standards. They have to meet the graduation credit. The school is getting reimbursed for them, whereas a homeschool student, the parents can be doing whatever they want for the instruction.
Thank you, Michelle. Yeah, so Dave talked about this a little bit, but if you code a child as homeschool, I mean, there's a PH school indicator, those kids will not count toward your graduation rate. And we remove private school students as well from the denominator. So you wanted to make sure that those kids are coded correctly. So frequently asked questions, school assignment. One of our students transferred to another Idaho public school per the records request that I received. Why is the student still assigned to my school? So I'm going to talk about this later, but we have preview application where you can actually see what happened to your student or if they actually transfer to a different Idaho public school once they transfer out of your school. And so you can see if they're, if you think that they may have transferred to the neighboring school, but the child is still in your list and you wonder, why is this student still with you? And if this happens, I'd like you to take the following actions. One is to contact the receiving school to make sure the student actually enrolled and received the same EDUID. And Amy and Roger emphasized this earlier. If anyone created a different EDUID for a child, it looks like for the sending school, the child never transferred because you're basically starting a new cohort for this child. And if that didn't resolve any issues, you would need to contact the parent or guardian to see what exactly happened to this child. And the important points regarding school assignment. School assignment is determined by the latest base school submitted via IC. And you must resubmit your or have previously resubmit their IC file to correct the school assignment. And are you really the last school? You may wonder that you may be the last school, last Idaho public school, but did the student transfer out of your school, immigrate to another country, or pass away before the end of 4-year or 5-year cohort window? If these apply to your kid, we will discuss this. We'll talk about how you can adjust your denominator in the next section. But school assignment, when we talk about school assignment, we're really talking about Idaho public school and who would see the child on your list. So you would need to submit documentation for that child if necessarily. Any questions for school assignment?
Yes, we do have a few. So, is it correct that IDLA counts as a homeschool, but IDVA would not be a homeschool?
Michelle?
Idaho Virtual Academy is a public school, so they count as a public school, not homeschool. In terms of IDLA, they are technically not a school. They're a program. So if they have credits from the, if the student has earned credits, those should be transcribed on your transcripts. And I don't know that I'm answering the question completely, but
I wonder, let me take a stab at it and see if this is what they're asking. If they have a student that comes to their district who takes an IDLA class or two, they could be considered a homeschooled student if they're just coming to take, the rest of their education is being homeschooled. But if they're going to Idaho Virtual and taking a few classes with their district, Idaho Virtual is considered another district, and so that is not a homeschooled student, that's a shared student.
thank you, Amy. That helps. I don't know.
I don't know if that's the question, but that's how I kind of interpreted it.
Thank you, Amy and Michelle. Hope that clarified. Taylor?
If it doesn't, I hope the person can clarify for us in the comments. Next question. If a student is going to private school but comes to school for elective classes, does that student become our cohort because we were the last to enroll?
So if that's the case, then you wanted to code this kiddo as the student as PH school P, so that the child is not included in the cohort. So any enrollment record with PH school flag, either P or H, are not included in the calculation. So when we pull and to determine the last school, we don't include those enrollment records with PH indicator into the mix. So that would automatically exclude those kids that are coded correctly. But they need to be coded correctly, otherwise they'll be part of your cohort.
Thank you. And then this question was from at the very beginning of this section, so it is a little bit older question. You can't automatically exclude Juniper Hills students, but if we submit proof of enrollment, you can?
Yes, that's correct. And since we don't receive IC enrollment record from them, we cannot automatically exclude those kids out of your cohort like we do for any other in-state transfers. But we're going to talk about this in the next section. If you submit documentation records request from Juniper Hills or Robert Jans, we'll remove those kids from your cohort. But in terms of school assignment, you're the last school in Idaho, excluding Juniper Hills and Robert Jans, so you will have that student in your list.
Great, thank you. That's the last question for now, Ayaka.
Okay, great, thank you. Okay, so we're gonna talk about grad status assignment next. And you wanted to ask this question when you're thinking about grad status assignment. What was the last exit reason code reported for the student via IC during the 4 or 5 year cohort window? And we have a variety of exit reason codes available in IC files, but we say out of cohort, foreign exchange, or deceased. Those two exit reasons are automatically out of cohort for grad status assignment. And we have graduate, transfer non-grad, and non-graduate as in cohort grad status assignment. I'm going to talk about what that means in the next slides. Okay, so out of cohort, foreign exchange student, if a child's last exit code is 5F for an exchange student, the student is automatically removed from your cohort. If you are coding for an exchange student with some other different codes, they are not automatically excluded from your cohort. Okay, and we also have deceased code, which is 6A. These kids are also automatically excluded from your cohort. You can submit an appeal to the SDE if a student passes away after the last IC submission, but before the end of cohort window. So if anyone exits with some other exit code, say that a child dropped out, but later you find out that the child passed away, then you can submit an appeal during the appeals window to say that the child last exit code is 6A for this child. And as we talked about this earlier, in cohort, we grad status of in cohort graduate will keep all these kids in your cohort. And these kids, their last exit code was 4A, 4G, and 4I. And if anyone re-enrolls in this, I'm not sure why, but we've seen several kids who receive 4A, but in the next following school year, sometimes kids come back for whatever reason. If that happens, then these students will be coded as if that happens, then these kids' grad status will change to non-graduate, even though the last exit code may have been 4A. And we have grad status of transfer non-grad. These students remain in your cohort if their last exit reason code submitted via IC is 2B, which is within Idaho private school or federal state setting, 2C transfer out of state, 2D transfer out of country, or 2E was in Idaho to homeschool. You can manually remove these students out of your cohort by submitting transfer documentation to the SDE. And we have in cohort grad status of in cohort non-graduate. Any other students that are coded whose last exit reason code is any of the other exit codes remain in your cohort. You cannot remove these students out of your cohort unless the student transfers or passes away after the last IC submission, but before the end of 4-year or 5-year cohort window. And I kind of talked about this regarding 6A earlier. If a child dropped out, for example, and then later you realize that child actually transferred to Washington and you have records request, then you can manually remove the child out of your cohort by submitting an appeal and supporting documentation showing the exit reason has been updated since the last IC submission. An in-state transfer, again, must be verified via IC, so you can't submit a records request from neighboring school, say, hey, this child transferred to my neighbors. It has to be submitted, the enrollment record has to be submitted via IC by the neighboring school, or LEA in this case. And then we transfer those kids to the neighboring school. If that didn't happen, we talked about this, you wanted to follow up with the receiving school as well as the parent. And frequent coding mistakes that we see regarding grad status assignment is using 1A, 5C, or 2D exit foreign exchange students. If they're coded as 5F in the first place, we'll remove these kids. But if you code these kids as 1A, 5C, or 2D, you need to provide documentation to appeal these kids that they are actually foreign exchange students. And I'm sure you have documentation, but if you don't have to do it in the first place and you have lots of foreign exchange students, you wanted to code it right in the first place. And also, not coding graduates as graduates. We see, we talked about this in earlier graduate section. If you wanted to go back, it's linked on this slide. Frequently asked question regarding grad status. One of my students whom I thought was coming back transferred, passed away during the summer. Do I need to correct the IC exit reason code? And this happens a lot because a lot of kids transfer out of school during the summer. And answer from us is no, it is not the IC coordinator's responsibility to keep updating the exit code. If the exit reason code was correct at the time of submission, no need to resubmit the IC file. If the IC and exit reason code was incorrect at the time of submission, the IC file needs to be resubmitted. And again, if a code changes or status changes during the summer that you thought that they were coming back with 1A, but you received, now you have a records request from a different school, out of state school, for example, then you would need to appeal during the appeals window. So important point, 1, grad status assignment. Grad status is determined based on the latest IC exit reason code. You can change the grad status by submitting IC file, transfer documentation, or appeal. Any questions about cohort grad status assignment?
Yes. If a student is coming to school for part-time class, what is their enrollment code?
If they're coming for what? I didn't hear that.
Sorry, I'll repeat it. If a student is coming to school for part-time or less, what is their enrollment code?
It depends on where they're coming from. If they're coming from, out of state, they would still be, and I guess I was answering that versus entry code. Are they asking for the entry code, or are they asking whether they are a homeschooled or part-time student? If they're coming, the entry code would be wherever they're coming from. If they're coming in from homeschool, if they're coming in from another Idaho district, or if they're coming in from out of state. If they are part-time because they are homeschooled and have no intention of getting a diploma with your LEA, then they would be coded as H for homeschool. If they're going the other part-time to a private school, they would be coded as P for private school.
Okay, thank you. And Katie, if that doesn't answer your question, let us know in the questions box and we can do a follow-up. Question, is the IDYCA considered a public school?
Yes, Idaho Youth Challenge Academy is considered a public school.
Thank you. And are you able to go back a slide for an attendant?
Yeah. This one?
I will wait for him to confirm.
Okay, thank you.
The transfer documentation appeal, what's the difference?
Mhm. So, can I move this slide back here? Sorry if you're looking at the slide, whoever requested that slide to be on. If you're submitting documentation for any of the transfer codes, that's the transfer documentation. It's basically the same thing. We're just trying to differentiate. You're submitting the transfer documentation to the transfer code versus you're submitting appeal for non-transfer code with supporting documentation. But essentially, it's the same thing. We just need to know if a child transferred, where the child went, and when the child transferred.
Okay, and that looks like the last question for now. Thank you.
I did want to
Okay.
say something, Ayaka, that
Oh, no, go ahead.
when you're getting ready to roll your kids over into the next year, if you can try to be sure that your foreign exchange students are exited as foreign exchange, that if you know ahead of time that kids are going to be transferring out, go ahead and try to mark those. Otherwise, they're going to automatically roll over as a 1A. And I think that's what happens a lot of times, is that rollover process happens before any of those other changes are made, and people then they don't go back and identify those kids as foreign exchange or out of state. Or even with the graduates, if you know someone's not graduating, and that's why some students are coded as a 4A and then they come back the next year. It was just part of the rollover process at the end of the year that made every senior a graduate. So if you can try to pay attention to some of that, that might save some of your corrections. Save having to go back and make corrections because of inaccurate data at the time.
Mm-hmm. Great, thank you, Amy. Okay, we have 30 minutes left, 25 minutes left, so let's move on to grad status adjustment. And in this section, we're going to talk about how you can adjust the grad status that we discussed in the previous section. And remember, I have a table there. It was the last IC exit reason code, grad status, and what you would need to do, whether you would need to resubmit IC, transfer document, submission, or appeal submission. And then, as I discussed earlier, documentation submitting for the transfer code is considered transfer documentation. And if you will have everyone else, if you don't have, if you have someone with a different exit code that's not listed here, you would need to submit an appeal for that child if you have transfer documentation. Well, if you have any of the documentation you have for that child. And how do I submit documentation / appeal? And we offer 3 opportunities. One is preview window. We also have appeals window as well as re-appeals window, and we call this as a follow-up window. There's 5 W's of preview / re-appeal windows. Why do we preview or re-appeal? Whom to preview, re-appeal, where to preview, re-appeal, when to preview, re-appeal, and what to submit during the preview and re-appeal window. Why preview? The preview window, you wanted to use preview window to verify your cohort members, and we do our best to assign these kids correctly. but you always wanted to verify all work and not to just wait till the end and then last minute to say, hey, I don't recognize this kid. Why is this child in my cohort? And you wanted to use preview window to identify your cohort members. And you also wanted to identify and correct IC submission errors if anyone is coded as 1A, even though the child actually graduated. You wanted to recode these kids as 4A because appeals window, once the appeals window process starts, you can, but the appeals window does not allow you to change the exit reason code that's stored in our database. So you use preview window to identify and correct any IC submission errors that you may spot. And also you can use preview window to submit transfer documentation, as we talked about earlier. If the kids have transfer exit reason code, then you can start submitting transfer documentation during the preview window. And why do we reappeal or appeal? Appeal window is for submitting an appeal with supporting documentation. If any of your kids have an exit code that is not considered transfer, but the child later transfer out of your school, you can use the appeals window to submit an appeals document, an appeal as well as supporting documentation. And also reappeal is during appeals window, we approve appeals. You wanted to verify reviewers' work. We do our best, again, for accuracy, but you get stuck with the graduation rate that we finalized. So you wanted to verify that we did our work. And also you can resubmit an appeal during the re-appeal process if you don't agree with our process, or if we make any mistakes, or if you have questions about our comments, you can always resubmit an appeal during the re-appeals window. Whom to preview reappeal in 2021. We have preview window for the cohort class of 2021 to 2025. You can see a list of kids in each cohort class, and you can see their grad status. If you go there right now, we have cohort class of 2024, but once the next year hits, we have class of 2025 as well once you start submitting IC file for the class of 2025. And for reappeal is just for cohort class of 2020 for 5-year graduation rate, and then cohort class of 2021 for 4-year graduation rate. And I have links there for preview application as well as 4-year and 5-year applications. The appeals applications don't open until October of each year. In this case, this year is 2021, but preview window the application is open. So if you wanted to go and take out your list right now, you can certainly do so. And when to preview reappeal. Preview application is open all year long, except during the appeals window to minimize confusion. And I think you would target preview following each IC submission window. That's when the data gets updated by you and everyone else's submission. So it would make sense for you to go in and look at the latest status. And appeals window, it's during the appeals and reappeals window. It's scheduled to be open in October and December timeline every year. And this is because we wait for the October IC submission. And I have calendar here for you to target preview in 2021. We already passed March, but we are hosting this webinar right now, today, the 24th, because is it June? Oh, no, May IC upload is coming up, correct? Amy, Roger?
The May was due last Friday. So
last Friday. Okay, yeah, thank you. Yeah, so the data there is up to date. So you wanted to go to, you wanted to target preview this week, maybe to see where you are with this year's or the future year's cohort members. And I have dates here also if you wanted to print this out and keep it in your desk to remind you. To clarify, it's 25 next year, but it's only open for future, current, and future cohorts, and no preview available for the class of 2020, which is the last cohort class of 2020 is those that graduated last year for the most part. An appeals window, reappeals window this year. I'm scheduling this on the 25th of October. I pushed it a week later, I think, because we always kind of scramble right after the October IC submission and to get the data going. So I just decided to push that 1 week out so we have more time to finalize our data and take a snapshot before we roll this out to you guys. So it opens on the 25th and it closes on the 5th of November. And you always wanted to submit your appeals then. The reappeals window is really for reappeals and submit. I know some people wait till December, and I totally forgot that we had appeals window and wait till December to submit appeals, but it really won't give you any chance to clarify or resubmit in December timeline. So we wanted to hit the October appeals window for sure to make any appeals for the class of 2021, cohort class of 2021 and cohort class of 2020. And what to submit during the preview window, previous IC files, as we discussed. You wanted to submit, especially for those who graduated, to correct the erroneous exit reason code. And also preview application accepts transfer documentation. If you have in-state private state setting 2B or out-of-state 2C, you should have records request or enrollment verification form that you can submit for those kids. If a child has 2E, you should have a letter or email from the parent or guardian, and also intent to homeschool form signed by the parent or guardian. If a child is 2D out of state, you should have a visual form signed by the parent or guardian or written confirmation from the parent guardian. And I do have a link there that outlines what documentation needs to be submitted for which transfer exit code. So if you wanted to take a look at that link, we'll discuss this, and that document, we'll discuss it more in detail. And what to submit during reappeal window, transfer documentation to be, if you didn't get to the preview application during the preview window, you can continue to submit transfer documentation for those kids who had the latest code of 2B, 2C, 2E, or 2D. And also you can submit appeals with supporting documentation, exit reason. So any of the kids that did not have exit reason of transfer as the last exit code, but somehow later transferred by the end of cohort window, you can submit transfer documentation as supporting documentation or evidence for appeal. You can also submit a letter or email from the parent or guardian or online obituary for those kids who passed away by the end of cohort window. And if the child was coded as 6A to begin with, you don't have to submit anything because we know that the child had already passed away, and so you don't have to scramble to get these documentation. We're talking about only when the child had a different exit code, but later you find out the child has passed away, then you would need to submit this kind of documentation to appeal. And frequent submission mistakes for grad status adjustment. Submit an appeal for students with no supporting documentation. I know some people are really nice and let us know that, well, this child dropped out or disappeared, or we don't know what happened to this child. I mean, there is nothing that we can do on our end to approve those kind of appeals if you don't have any documentation, transfer documentation. You don't have to submit those appeals to us. Also, we see a lot of people submitting transfer supporting documentation that is dated after the end of cohort. So if anyone, like say, if anyone transferred, and I think typically happens like October, December timeline, people say, oh yeah, I finally got a records request from school, out-of-state school. The child finally enrolled in their school in October of 2021. We cannot approve that as documentation because the end of cohort year is really the end of this school year. That the documentation came after the end of cohort year. So then you wanted to make sure that everything that you submit to us is dated before the end of cohort year. Okay. Okay, so grad status adjustment question, can I submit an appeal in the preview application? The answer is no, the preview application does not accept appeals. Any appeals must be submitted in the appeals application. So if you code a child as 1A, a child transfer during the summer, you would need to wait until the appeals window to submit documentation because it's really considered an appeal, not the transfer, because the last exit code for this child is 1A, not 2C. If a child, like Amy was saying earlier, if you code this child as 2C, then you can submit documentation in the preview application because 2C is considered transfer exit code. And so important point regarding grad status adjustment, you would need to resubmit IC file before the appeals window to fix any erroneous IC exit reason code, to show that student graduated, to show that student was foreign exchange student. If you wanted to make any of those adjustments, you wanted to do that prior to the appeals window, because once we take a snapshot for the appeals window of our database, we cannot amend it. So wanted to make sure that any corrections that you're doing is happening prior to the appeals window. And important point number 2 is to submit transfer documentation. You want to submit transfer documentation to confirm the latest transfer exit reason. Again, 2B, 2C, 2D, and 2E, those are considered transfer exit reason. And you would want to submit appeals for with supporting documentation to show that the student passed away or transferred after the last IC submission, but before the end of cohort window. If that happens, you would need to submit an appeal in the appeals application to remove those kids out of cohort. Oh, I went pretty quickly since we have 10 minutes left, but do you have any questions regarding grad status adjustment?
We do have a few. The first one, I see that there will not be a withdrawal form accepted as evidence of a homeschool transfer, but a letter or email signed by the parent will be. If we are doing online enrollment/exit forms, which have an electronic signature, will those be accepted?
Do you want to take this, Michelle? Or I'm thinking as long as you had a conversation with the parents saying what the homeschool means and the responsibility the parent has to have in order to homeschool a child, I think that will be considered an evidence for homeschool transfer. But what do you think, Michelle?
I would second that. I think the important part is that the parent has to understand what it means to homeschool. And if they have anything on there, they put any kind of note. And I probably would have a box or something that says, you know, or an explanation, this is what homeschooling means. You know, that they're providing instruction to meet the state standard or to align with the subjects commonly and usually taught in the public schools. I think that to me, it's more about the parents' understanding as opposed to accepting electronic signature. Yeah, we can accept the electronic signature. We just want to make sure they understand this is what homeschooling is.
Thank you, Michelle.
Thank you. Next question. Is the end of the cohort year considered any time prior to the beginning of the next school year determined at each district, or is there a concrete date?
It's by each district. There's no concrete date. It will look at the date of your transcript. I mean, whatever the transfer documentation that you submit to us, and then we can look at your October IC submission to see when your school started.
Thank you.
But can I add to that? Typically, and this is something that we like discussed this in the business rules documentation, but if the child transfers during the summer or like right before the graduation date, we may just keep that child to your school. And it depends on if a child had an opportunity during the summer to graduate. I mean, if you can submit a transcript, say, oh, the child was really close to graduate, but decided to get a diploma from any other state or schools, that would be great. But say the child only had 10 credits and then transferred during the summer, I'm not sure if we can approve that as a transfer. Going back to the fairness that we talked about earlier, we wanted to make sure that the child had enough time to graduate by the end of 4 years. So it actually really depends.
I think adding to that, Ayaka, would be the same if you have parents a week before graduation or the day before graduation that are supposedly signing them out to homeschool. We haven't approved those in the past because they didn't do the work that was necessary to graduate in the time that they had. And so transferring out to homeschool is back to that fairness issue. So.
And it looks like you actually answered the next question already. So that was the last question for now.
Okay, great. And we have 6 minutes. Hopefully we can scroll to the end. And here are updates and reminders. And we're going to talk about Idaho Job Corps, definition of private homeschool students, and intent to homeschool form. Oh, these kind of look familiar. We kind of talked about this a little bit. But Idaho Job Corps, IDBA, is providing educational services to diploma track students who transfer to Idaho Job Corps. And so you should receive a records request from Idaho Job Corps. I mean, if you receive records request from Idaho Job Corps, that is no longer accepted as transfer evidence for the cohort class of 2021 and forward, because IDBA should be uploading these kids as their kids, and that your students' records should automatically transfer to IDBA if that was happening. So the records request from any other Job Corps continues to be accepted as transfer evidence, as we have done in the past. And this is something that we are going to clarify for the next school year, but student receiving majority of educational instruction using a curriculum adopted by the private or non-public entity or parent guardian are considered private or homeschool students. ICPH school field definition will be amended for the 2021-22 school year. And I cannot remember what our current definition is for PH school indicator, but we wanted to clarify it is really about curriculum adopted by the parent, guardian, and private entity versus public LEA. And the question may come to us and say, how to do with those public school student with no intention of graduating? Say a child is enrolled full-time, like a homeschool student is enrolled full-time to take advantage of advanced opportunity courses, but he or she has no intention of graduating from your school. Then you wanted to collect and submit the enrollment form for that child and outline the enrollment form should outline school and students' responsibilities and clarify expectations. And I've seen great forms out there. If you don't mind sending yours to me so I can share it with others after this presentation, that would be great. And we kind of talked about this a little bit earlier about intent to homeschool form. Homeschool transfer is a special state exception to the rigid federal rule, and use the intent to homeschool form to communicate the parent or guardian their responsibility. And again, I've seen a great form out there. If you don't mind, send it to me and so I can share it with the others. That would be great. And some important to consider here is school withdrawal form is no longer accepted as homeschool transfer evidence for the cohort class of 2022 and forward. A letter email signed by the parent guardian continues to be accepted as homeschool transfer evidence. But again, as Michelle and I talked about this earlier, it's just that we wanted to make sure that the parents and guardians are educated regarding homeschool. Michelle already talked about homeschool versus school at home. What is really exactly the difference? And I've seen withdrawal document or withdrawal form that says homeschool / GED / work / and we wonder how to approve or disapprove these forms, because GED technically doesn't count, but homeschool counts. And, that's why we wanted you to use homeschool intent homeschool form to really show us that, well, this child really transferred to homeschool, rather than the / thing that people can write on the withdrawal form. And also we've seen withdrawal form that's signed by parent or not signed by parent guardian, and we've seen adult students checking out themselves or the school staff is checking them out because no one really showed up to check themselves out, and we cannot accept those documentation that the forms have to be signed by parent or guardian to show that the child is being homeschooled by that parent and guardian. And again, this is already an exception to the federal rule, since homeschool in our state doesn't end up with a high school diploma. So we just wanted to ask you to start collecting, or this has been out there, but using intent to homeschool form to document homeschool transfers. It's 12 p.m. here in Boise, but do you have any last questions to us?
Yes, there are a couple. Can you repeat the information on Job Corps transfers, please?
Yes, so we do accept Job Corps transfer documentation records request from Job Corps around the country, since the child could be in the diploma track option. But regarding Idaho Job Corps, they are all transferred into IDVA. So we know if a child is in diploma track, then you know that the Idaho Job Corps kids are under IDVA enrollment record. So then it's kind of considered in-state transfer. So that's what we're saying. Like any other in-state transfers, we do not accept records requests for in-state transfers. But for any other out-of-state Job Corps, since we don't have these, we don't have IC going back and forth with out-of-state Job Corps, we would still accept records requests as transfer evidence. Hope that makes sense.
Yes, and there was a kind of a clarification follow-up saying they aren't all coming to IDVA. Just because they are in the Idaho Job Corps doesn't mean they're enrolling at IDVA.
Oh, is this from IDVA?
Yes.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, just diploma. Yeah, exactly. Thank you. Yeah, some of those kids are exactly going to get a GED or not getting GED. I don't know how the Job Corps is being set up, but if those kids are not coming to IDVA, then they're not seeking the diploma. So if that's the case, then you're the last school, and you may have a records request from Idaho Job Corps, but we will not accept that as a transfer evidence.
Thank you. Next question. What if a student has released their parent of parental rights?
What was the, sorry, you kind of cut out in the first place.
No, it's okay, sorry. What if a student has released their parent of the parental rights?
They wouldn't be able to be removed for homeschool purposes because homeschooling only occurs in this state under the direction of the parent or guardian.
Thank you, Michelle.
Yeah, thank you. And I am not seeing any more questions right now.
I missed a slide, I think, when you were talking about homeschooled students who may be coming full time. You have the slide that talks about that they have to have the majority of their education from home. I think you had that. And then, so if the students are coming full time for IDLA classes or the Advanced Opportunities money, are they supposed to be coded as homeschool? No. And then they're appealed? That's the part I was missing. Or are they still counted as homeschool? Yes.
Okay, so that's up to LEAs and schools to determine what majority means to you guys.
Majority could be the majority of their whole career, not just that particular year.
Yeah, I think we need to clarify this, but I was thinking that particular school year or the semester. So majority of the educational instruction during that school year or that particular semester that you were reporting this child's enrollment or is using curriculum adopted by private or non-public. So I guess from our perspective, we would not know what this child is doing. A child may be enrolled full-time in your school, but if the parents say, hey, this child is doing full-time at home too, then how would we know the child is or isn't full-time? So it's really up to you guys and the parent to talk about what this child is doing. and what this child is considered. And that's why we're suggesting to have the dual enrollment form for those kids that may say these are on full time, so we consider public student, but they have no intention of graduating. Then it's really up to you to determine at that point if the child is considered H for homeschool or X for public. Then if you're considering this kid as X public, then you wanted to show that, well, this kid has no intention of graduating from our school, even though this child may be taking AL class, the full load of AL classes. And you can submit the dual enrollment form during the POs window.
Okay.
And that child out, or if your child is going back to homeschool, you may have different documentation for homeschool, exiting to homeschool. But to your point, Amy, if they're not coded as H, then they're not automatically being removed from the cohort. So you would need to submit some documentation to remove the child out of cohort.
But I guess I was wondering, is it still okay to report them as H? Because that one particular semester they might be taking a full load, but the rest of their high school or the rest of their school career, they're at home.
Yeah, again, it's up to you guys to decide. So,
Okay, thank you.
any questions?
I have not seen any more come up.
Okay, thank you so much, everyone, for sticking with us after 12 p.m. Going back to this slide, we have contact information, the email address linked to our name. So if you have any questions, please email us. I'm here. My number should be listed in the last slide. So if you wanted to give me a call regarding any questions, or hopefully you understand the process a little bit better, but please let me know if this confused you more so we can walk through the process and talk about cohort graduation rates. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Ayaka.
Thank you.
Thank you.